One summer moment can change a child's life. Through Toys for Tots Give and Go initiative, your support provides books, games, toys, and outdoor adventures that spark curiosity, creativity, and a love of nature. Whether it's fishing, learning a new sport, reading under a tree, or playing with friends, these moments build confidence and lifelong memories. For too many children, those moments never come. You can help change that this summer. Visit toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots, delivering hope beyond the holidays.
Feisty, fearless, and fair. She's an Emmy-winning journalist from the White House to war zones, telling all sides of the story. This is the Rita Cosby Show.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Rita Cosby this evening. President Trump has just started to speak at the foot of Mount Rushmore. I'm going to let you listen into a little bit of it here. He is speaking on, of course, the eve of America's 250th anniversary. Then we're going to get to Gail. Hold on for a second.
The South Dakota Air National Guard and those beautiful F-35s, we love them. And I want to thank you all for being here. This is a big crowd. This is a lovely crowd. And what a sight it is. I want to thank Senate Majority Leader John Thune, a good friend of mine, and all of us. Senator Mike Rounds, great guy. Governor Larry Roden, thank you, Larry.
And we'll come back to the president's speech. He's doing the obligatory thank yous and things like that, and I'll certainly have some sound from it as well. Of course, we got a little bit of advance notice on the copy. We're expecting the president to take some strong aim at communism in this country. And as I explained in the last hour, it is entirely appropriate to do that. Some people are going to, I'm telling you right now, the mainstream news media is going to call it a divisive and angry speech when it should be all celebratory. Of course, they're not going to have anything to say like that about Mayor Mamdani's speech, which was absolutely trashing and divisive and nasty and not true. But it is appropriate to attack our true threats and to talk about them on the eve of this. But before we cut for the hour, we were on with Gail to talk about our first president. And I am really interested, Gail, in what you have to say about this new movie. I guess it's a movie, not like a series, and it's called Young George Washington. Tell us about it, Gail.
Yes, it was very inspirational. For me, it was very patriotic. George Washington was always a hero to us, but this movie really personalizes it in a terrific way, showing his character to be very high integrity, very brave, but also with the ambition with humbleness, willing to learn how he escapes death a number of times. Just the young actor that played him, I had never heard of him, William Franklin Miller, and he was excellent. Ben Kingsley was in it, Kelsey Grammer, Mary Louise Parker. So this angel is getting very big names. And I read that in stock market recently, they have really made some money. So their fortunes are really up. So I guess they can afford to pay these people. Plus, I guess if you're patriotic, you might do this for less than you normally, might.
Oh, so that's a fantastic review, and we are very much in need in this country of really great biographies of George Washington. I think that in the early stage of our history, we had these mythological type stories. The cherry tree I can't tell a lie kind of story, which is the moral of that story is important. I get that, but apparently not true at all. And then we went to, I think, more flat depictions of him that weren't as inspiring. One of my favorite authors, period, is Ron Chernow, who's an incredible biographer. He's the one who wrote the Hamilton book. He's written so many incredible books. I highly recommend the Ulysses Grant book and his latest book about Mark Twain. And his book about George Washington is very good, but I'm sorry, Ron, I think it's the weakest of your efforts. It's not a great one. It's great. It's very good. It's a solid A-. But and of course I'm measuring it against some other stuff that he had done. So if this movie helps us to get a better handle on things, I think it would be. I think it's actually needed. I think it's needed.
And one other thing, and it was based on actually facts. The Indians in this story who participated, in the French-Indian War, and some actually helped Washington on his British side at that point, actually believed he was protected by the Great Spirit. And, I just felt, like President Trump, it's provincial protection. And the Indians saw it, and they did address it dramatically in the film. I don't know how dramatic it was addressed in real life, but it did happen in real life. It is factual.
Well, to have a 6-foot-tall man at that time, when the average man was like 5'6" or something, must have been pretty striking at the time. In addition to other things, his story Go ahead.
He was shot at. I mean, the Braves, the chief had ordered his underlings to shoot young George Washington, and they missed him. There were bullet holes in his jacket and in his hat.
Right. Well, anyway, Gail, thank you so much for that. I was hoping it would be. It's been a long time since I've just really wanted to see something like anything. I used to see like every movie. I mean, almost every movie. I was just always a huge consumer of the movies. And starting about 20 years ago, I just stopped. It just wasn't as compelling to me for a number of reasons. I can go into that another time. So thank you for that, Gail. Let's go to Perry in Nashville, a city that's about to become very important to me. My daughter is about to go to college there, so I can't wait to visit Nashville regularly. But Perry, you're talking about just how this 250th anniversary has come on pretty quickly. Sometimes it feels like 1976 was just yesterday. Sometimes it does feel like 50 years ago. But how does it feel to you?
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, 250 years in the grand scheme of things is not that much time.
Right.
But we keep hitting new things. I mean, whoever would have thunk it that we would not once but twice elect the world's greatest and the world's pedophiles to be president?
Oh, come on.
That's
Perry, look. I'm glad we had a technical difficulty there. This whole it's the childishness of it is really the thing that bothers me the most. For example, if you just say someone's a liar or someone's a con man, we heard that about President Nixon a lot. We heard that about every president, really. That's one thing. But this really cheapens the actual crime of pedophilia and that kind of stuff. I mean, I would assume that about 90% of the people who are throwing out that term about President Trump know it's not true, and they're just being what they think is cheeky. They think it's funny. I promise you that if they knew anyone who had ever even been remotely victimized in this way in their own families, their own circle, they wouldn't ever joke about it. So that's one thing. For that, whatever percentage of people who think it's true, they have a delusionary problem. It's just again, it's not based on any fact. And I guess I feel sorry for people who can't tell the difference between truth and reality. But I get the feeling someone who waits on a phone line like that is from the first category. Someone who knows it's not true and thinks it's going to be funny to drop a bomb like that. Maybe if you were saying he was a crook or an embezzler, whatever you want to say, maybe. But pedophilia is nothing to fool around about and talk about and joke about. It's just it's sad. Anyway. I wanted to get to a couple of other, something interesting about, I was just thinking that earlier today about news and how it traveled before we had real newspapers, let alone radio and TV and cable and internet and things like that. And I was thinking about that in the context of Shakespeare, and just bear with me here while I'm talking about Shakespeare on the eve of July 4th. Shakespeare had a number of plays based on things that were going on not that far from the actual moment that the play was being performed. He has stories about what happened relatively recently in the royal families of Europe. Romeo and Juliet, which was the specific play I was thinking about, depicts rivalries between different families and aristocratic families in Italy. And I'm thinking, how do they know about that? There was no newspaper or TV show. How did they find out about this kind of stuff? And I'm sure there's explanations for it, and I'm sure it was something that was disseminated in another way. But the reason why I think it feels like 250 years for the United States feels like a longer history than, for example, the Roman Empire, which had many more hundreds of years of power and things like that, is because we've been jam-packed with news. The formation of the United States of America comes at a time when newspapers are also becoming nascent, are having their breakout moment on the world stage. There have been newspapers before, of course, 1776, but the United States, first of all, played a big role in the larger growth of newspaper type news, and that becoming a part of our culture in Western culture and also in other parts of the world, and other media aspects. So in other words, time very often can feel like it's going by faster when you've got fewer things happening, and sometimes it feels like it's going slower when fewer things are happening. But we have so much documented history because the rise of this country also corresponds with the rise of a media. And I am a huge critic of the media, for those of you who know. If you think I'm one of those, one of my biggest pet peeves about so many of my colleagues in the news media is their thin skin and inability to face any criticism. And I have to say, I don't see that in a lot of other professions. My friends who are doctors are always talking about how the medical profession needs to be better, how many of their fellow doctors aren't the greatest, and the system isn't great. And I don't hear that enough from my colleagues in the news media. I wish more of them said, like, look, we're doing our best, but we're not doing a good job here. We're missing out on a lot of important stories. The way that we do stories very often is wrong. We've got to do this better. At hospitals, when anyone dies at a hospital, they have to have this big conference. It's called an M&M conference. The M being for mortality, because they got to make sure that legally they've learned something from the death, and maybe it wasn't their fault, maybe it was, but they got to make sure. We should do that in the news media. Every time there's a cruddy story or a mistake that's made, or maybe it gets a bad rating, it doesn't matter. There should be a special session of let's go over this. There's almost no mentoring process or talk out our mistakes process in any place that I've worked. And I've worked at some big budget places. I worked at CNBC. I worked at CNN. I worked at Fox. Plenty of budget for that there. And unless the individual executive producer like me running the show decided to sit everyone down and say, hey, we did this wrong, we did this right, then there was no process for that. And that's inexcusable. People are using us as the source of record for things that are going on in the world. And that's very important. That's very important to take that responsibility. Let's talk to Martha in Brooklyn. Martha, what do you got for us?
Yes, I'm Audrey, and I just want to thank you for your comments. After he finished his speech, I may not have heard the entire speech. I was shocked by the way he prepared his speech. One of his statements...
You're talking about Mayor Mamdani. Mayor Mamdani.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one of his statements was, division is the oldest trick of politics. Politics. But then his following statements kind of inferred that we, in the American culture, don't uphold the values that we have in our Constitution. This is my own personal opinion. After he finished that, I thought it was his argument, I'm going to say argument because he made that premise about division. After he finished that, my own opinion about what he was saying was very duplicitous.
Yeah. Well, it was hypocritical. He's criticizing division, and then he makes divisive statements. I mean,
it was unreal. So yeah. I said, believe me, I'm not being sarcastic when I say the following. After he finished that, I thought every American serviceman who are buried in cemeteries all around the world who fought for freedom of American values are turning over in their graves by what he said. It was a horrible anti-American speech.
Audrey, did you have someone in your family who died in our service?
I did, but he died after 2 wars.
Okay.
He did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your call. Look, again, as I said at the top of the hour, and I want to make it clear, anyone who thinks that I'm Mr. Pollyanna and I only want to look at the United States with rose-colored glasses doesn't know me, hasn't been listening to the body of my work, hasn't even listened to me just in the last 4 months that I've been here at this radio station and on this channel and on these networks. That's not who I am. I'm very, very willing to discuss real problems in this country, with one caveat. And this was something that I had as a rule when I was running shows on CNN and Fox and CNBC. If, as a reporter or a producer or an anchor on my program, you bring up a problem more than twice, and the third time you don't offer a solution or talk to someone who has a solution, and you can't do it anymore, because then you're just beating a dead horse and you're not helping. So if we're willing to fix it, or we're willing to acknowledge it is fixable, if there's something that we can't fix, like something that happened in the past, then I don't know how much value this has. Unless you think it can teach us something about right now. That's fine. But you got to tell us what that is. You can't just say, and so you should feel bad. I'm going to tell you about something that happened 100 years ago in America, and so you should feel bad. No, that's not constructive. All right, I got more callers waiting. We're going to come back for that. Again, we are on the eve of the July 4th, 250th anniversary of America's founding. I'm Jake Novak.
It's the Rita Cosby Show.
And we're back here. I'm Jake Novak, filling in for the Rita Cosby Show. I want to dip in again to President Trump as he's giving his speech right now at the base of Mount Rushmore, and he's going after communism in this speech on the eve of July 4th. Here we go.
Peddle Marxist lies about our heritage, tell our children that we live on stolen land or that our heroes were oppressors. They're doing something much worse than slandering our past. They are slandering and attacking our future. Not going to let that happen. They're trying to tear down the great American character, to destroy the people who declared independence, who crossed the Delaware, who settled the West, and conquered the skies. You know who those people are. But we will never let that happen. Our American ancestors did not shed their blood at Concord and Trenton, Gettysburg and Shiloh, Midway and Normandy, just so that a band of thieves, radicals, and lunatics could come in and loot, pillage our nation. Our heroes died to win, build, and to save, and to build truly a great country, the greatest country ever in the world.
Hey, I dipped in at the right time, didn't I? That was just like moments ago. I told you, President Trump going after this communist libel factory. You hear this all the time from people when you push back on an accusation. Instead of saying, you disproved this, or, show me your, they say, pushing back on the accusation itself is unfair. In other words, they try to change the rules of the game. You want to make an accusation and I push back against it, then let's have the back and forth about what you've just accused me of or my country of. Not, you have no, all you ever do was want to defend your country. No, well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but that doesn't matter. We're talking about a specific accusation here. You want to say a country is on stolen land? Let's have that discussion. You want to say this country, capitalism, has caused more poverty and pain? Let's have that discussion. But don't tell me I'm not allowed to push back because all I ever do is defend my country. That's a silly game. All right, our last half hour here on the Rita Cosby Show. I'm Jake Novak, filling in for Rita. We got our last half hour coming up. Going to hear more of your calls. Happy birthday, America.
This is the Rita Cosby Show.
And I'm Jake Novak in for Rita Cosby this evening. It's July 3rd. We are 26 minutes away from at least on the East Coast time, the official 250th birthday of the United States of America. I could talk about a lot of the things that I'm grateful for. I have to start with my family that's been here for a long time. I'm a sixth generation American on my father's side, so my children are seventh generation. So obviously there's a lot to be thankful for. We made it this far. But I would say that the thing that really I am the most grateful for is the fact that the country absolutely goes with the times, is willing to change if it has to, and adapt to what is needed at the time. It's not stuck in the past. You go to some of these European countries, and it's charming to go to them and see how much of the past is there right in front of you. It's charming, and it's great to visit. But then you remember, wow, these people didn't move with the times. These used to be the most dominant nations in the world. And for some reason, they stagnated. And I don't think America is stagnating in that sense. I think we've got a lot of problems now, and we have more enemies than we've ever had, and they are getting more successful, sadly, in a number of their attacks on us. But stagnation in this country, I don't think is our problem. That's not our problem. We move and change really quickly. Just look at some of our major cities. They change very regularly. I spent a lot of my adolescence and young years in my young 20s in Washington, D.C., and I can tell you every time I go down there, I get lost. It changes a lot, and not always for the better, but I like the fact that we're elastic in this country. Let's put it that way. I could say a lot more, but that was just the first thing that kind of came into my head. Cody in Dallas has been waiting for a long time, and you want to talk about President Trump. Yeah,
if he's not the biggest protector of pedophiles at best, and that
it's the same caller, guys. You got to screen this guy up better. Again, if you really cared about pedophilia and really cared about these kinds of crimes, you wouldn't be fighting it, quote unquote, by making prank calls to a radio station. I'm just telling you that right now. Everyone, understand that this is not. These kind of people who make these kinds of calls aren't really actually on the right side of anything. If they were, they would be finding much more constructive ways to help. Max in Manhattan, what do you got for us?
Jay, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
As far as these individuals or these groups that are blaming us for taking over native land, here's something for them. Let's look at Constantinople. That was originally Greek and was taken over by the Muslims in 1453 by the Turks. They profess Islam. Have they given it back? No, they haven't. Eritrea was originally part of Ethiopia, and that was Christian. Have the Muslims took it over in recent years, and have they given it back? No. Egypt was once 90% Christian, and it's more like 90% Muslim right now. Have they given it back? No. Let's look at the Indians that have come over here with the H-1B visas. They should be paying more attention to what's happening in Jammu Kashmir. They're having their land taken over up north in India by the Muslims. They should be worrying about that and taking it back instead of coming here and opening their mouths and taking jobs away.
You know, and the point that I think I would make from your comments is, you know, you can see where this is coming from. So many of the critics of this country, especially when they're immigrants or someone like, again, recent immigrants like Zohar Mamdani or people like that, are doing a classic psychological game called projection. They come from countries that are far worse in almost every category of human rights violation, from slavery to stolen land to lack of religious liberty, and on and on and on down the line. And so they decide to focus on America's sins in those categories, which are far fewer and in many cases far less severe, because it's easier to deal with that than talk about their own sins. It's an old game. People do it it starts in the schoolyard. Teacher, he's hitting people when you're the one who was doing all the hitting. More than that, you know, that's the way this works. And I'm very used to it, and I think a lot of us are very used to it. I want to make another comment, though, about the whole stolen land thing, though, because it's important to understand this about Native American culture. Just about every Native American tribe did not, and of course many of them still survive, do not have any serious concept of land ownership, like, you know, deed to a land, like this is my property. That's not the way that the Native Americans looked at things. Doesn't mean that many of them weren't improperly treated in this country. Doesn't mean that we've gotten ourselves in this country for well over 150 years or so of not being able to properly compensate them and deal with that. But the idea that this was like as if someone stole the deed to a land or ownership of land from someone else shows a tremendous ignorance of Native American culture and their own way of life. It means you don't get it. If you say, I've seen speeches. We saw things at the Democratic National Convention where every speaker said, or a lot of speakers said, before I start speaking, I want to say that this is the land of whatever Native American tribe they were mentioning. It's not the way it works. And this is, by the way, is a credit to the Native American tribe. They didn't think of land as being something that a human could own and pass down from generation to generation. Just because we do for legal purposes and to have property rights in this country doesn't mean that it's that someone else had the same concept. So again, people, it comes down so very often to ignorance. So very often to ignorance. People don't know what they're talking about. Sal in New Jersey? You're in New Jersey, Sal?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead.
Why does Trump do everything but stand on his head to prevent the Epstein files from coming out unredacted?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because here's an interesting thing. You know, we had these guys, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, decide to release the files and release the names. And you know what happened? 4 or 5 guys' names were on there, and they were completely innocent. They had appeared in a lineup. You know what they do at the police station? They get 6 guys to stand in front of a one-way mirror, and I guess it's called a two-way mirror, one-way glass, and they know that there's only one guy that they think actually committed the crime, but they put 5 dudes in there. Sometimes it's an off-duty cop that they whatever. So you know, these people got smeared. And so you can't do that. Well, I want to get to the truth. Okay, get to the truth. But, you know, you can't ruin people's lives just because you're impatient to go through a bunch of files. So that's one big reason. Another big reason is, you know, you have something called the rules of evidence. A file where someone says something happened to them isn't actual fact. It's testimony. Might be true. But, you know, sometimes you just have to be, you know, we don't allow this kind of willy-nilly flying out of data to come out. And by the way, so much has come out, and so far we don't have, I'm not seeing anyone else getting prosecuted. I'm seeing a lot of reputations being destroyed, some of which very much deserved. Boy, Bill Gates' reputation has fallen through the floor, so much so that the guy who wishes he was his father, Warren Buffett, is kind of having a divorce with him. You know, I did financial news for years, and every year it made me a little queasy because I don't really dislike Warren Buffett that much. I think that there's a lot of PR and BS surrounding his persona, but I give him credit. He's a heck of an investor, okay? So every year they have at the Berkshire Hathaway, that's his company, stock shareholders event. They call it Buffett stock because people go and they were just worshiping him. And it was a whole weekend, and all the companies that Berkshire Hathaway has stakes in have little booths at this thing, and that includes Dairy Queen and Wrigley's and cool things to eat and snack on. I'll call it. It's like Woodstock for investors. And Bill Gates was very often one of the guests that they would have there. And there was one particular year, probably like 15 years ago, maybe a little less, where Warren Buffett's on stage with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's own son. And I'm sorry, I apologize to anyone who's offended by this, but the body language on stage was just so clear. Warren loved Bill Gates more than his own son. I mean, it was just so obvious. At least that day, it looked like that. I mean, their bond was strong. And many of you may remember that Warren Buffett, in lieu of actually giving charity, which he never really does, he just promised to donate money, all of his money basically by the end of his life, or to the Bill Gates Foundation, which he's done. So I guess that's technically charity. But in other words, he's given it over to someone else to give to the charity. Well, Warren Buffett, breaking news, in the last couple of days has said that his usual, he makes these donations every 6 months. His mid-year donation that's supposed to come at the end of June to the Bill Gates Foundation is on hold because of these Epstein allegations, and he's maybe thinking about not making that donation anymore. And good. I think Bill Gates should have known better than to associate with this guy and send him emails asking for how he can cheat on his wife. And a couple of other things, too. None of which Bill Gates has denied. And unlike Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, I wouldn't throw Bill Gates' name out there if he hadn't already admitted to these things, what I just said. So that's how that works. So there you go. Look, folks, you know, this is an amazing time in America in that people have a platform. You know, when the internet started to become more prevalent, that was also when I was really getting into the broadcast news business. I started full-time in the broadcast news business getting out of grad school, which you don't have to go to grad school for broadcast journalism if you have any experience, even an internship. but I didn't, and I wanted to get into it, so I went to a grad school program. But when I finished with it, I immediately was hired to be the producer. I was in charge of a show coming right out of grad school, and believe me, I wasn't qualified yet. I was running the evening news at an ABC affiliate in Bangor, Maine. And yes, that's a small market, but the people there are just as deserving of a professional newscast as anyone else. And first few weeks there, they didn't get one from me. I was on my way. It didn't take me long, and I eventually got there. But I did learn on the job. But that was also when the internet was really starting to emerge as, among other things, a news source for people. And I was stunned by how many of my colleagues in the business, especially as I got into bigger and bigger markets and back to the national market here in New York, how frightened and angry and threatened by citizen journalists giving us information people in my industry were. And I thought to myself, like, why? I'm so tired of doing the same old stories all the time. We're still going to be better produced and more flashy and polished than those people out in the field. And now we can use their information. And as long as we attribute it to them, we've got more content. If you don't think I was dying for content, producing a 1-hour show every night, a 1-hour local news show in Bangor, Maine in 1994 and 1995. I mean, thank God the OJ trial was going on then, because I had 2 minutes knocked out every day. Back then, when people didn't necessarily have cable and weren't getting that from CNN, you know, the local news was covering, for example, stories like the OJ trial, even though it was out in Los Angeles and it was more of a national news story. I needed that. I wanted more stories. If somebody in the state of Maine had, if they had smartphones back then and had some video of a deer getting caught in a trap or something, I would have taken that too. And I was shocked by how against more information, in some ways against the First Amendment. Some of the biggest opponents of the First Amendment are journalists, so-called journalists. Actually, they're corporate kind of, robots. Orrin in New Jersey, what do you got for us here on the eve of our national holiday?
Is your family embarrassed?
Man, this guy, it's the same caller every time. Wow, it's sad. It's sad that someone thinks that they're making a difference making these guns. All right, I'm not going to pay any more attention to this. This hasn't happened to me yet in all the months that I've been here. I haven't had this kind of spam kind of calling. It happens. I guess it happens. Again, just for those of you who might think I'm being a little bit rude or cutting someone off, understand that anyone who really cares about if they truly believe that there's crimes being committed by this president in the past of that kind of nature, prank calling a station, basically effectively doing that, is not going to change it. So it's someone with another problem. I hope they get help. Let's take a break right now. Before we come back, let's do the Tunnel to Towers. I want to talk a little bit about first responders here for a second. And this is a story.
The Rita Cosby Show presents Support Our Heroes.
I've been talking about my career in news, and one of the things that you learn when you work in local news for a while, and I only was in local news for 6 years, but the big problem that you have when you work in local news is will you become cynical? Will you become jaded when all you do every night is the fires and the shootings and the robberies and the vandalism and that kind of stuff? And that's a danger. It's a danger that happens to a lot of people in this business. It's one of the reasons why local news to me is a fail.
It's the Rita Cosby Show.
And I'm Jake Novak, filling in for Rita Cosby. What an honor to fill in for her as we are now just a little bit more than 5 minutes before the official beginning of the July 4th holiday, the beginning of the day July 4th, and in the United States of America's 250th anniversary. I can't recommend Ron Chernow's books enough, although I do think his George Washington book is maybe the weakest of the lot, but it's still a solid A- book. Almost all of his other books are A+ books. But if you do want to get some incredible reading about our founding fathers, can't recommend enough David McCullough's book about John Adams, David McCullough's book, not about a founding father, but about Harry Truman. All of his books, David McCullough, you should read. And so many other books, really. It's a good time to pick up some of these really great books that we have written by people who have the historical knowledge and their facts straight, as well as any academic in the world, but they are writers to a degree that you can really fathom it, and it's not like reading an academic journal. And the authors I talk about a lot are Ron Chernow. I believe Doris Kearns Goodwin, for the most part, is one of those people. David McCullough, who's passed on. Stephen Ambrose, who's passed on. Can't recommend, really, just read everything by these people. If you're looking for good reading material, especially in honor of our 250th anniversary as a country, please do that. I want to say one thing that's a little bit more personal, but it does involve life and death. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last week, and I'm actually going to be a guest on The Rev and the Rabbi on many of the stations that you're hearing this show on Sunday, where I talked about this. Big spoiler alert, I'm sure most of you get it. I am a Jewish person. I come from a traditional Jewish family. I had a traditional Jewish upbringing, educated in yeshivas, the whole thing. And very often I think about, and mostly these last few days, the thousands and maybe even millions of Jewish people who would be alive today if their leaders, many of them rabbis in Europe at the end of the 19th century and in the early 20th century, hadn't trash-talked the United States and called it in Yiddish the Treifa Medina, the non-kosher country. Because they did. And they couldn't have been more wrong. And maybe those of them who stayed and perished years later in the Holocaust wouldn't have died if they had come to this country and not listened to that slander of this country. So I think about that a lot. And that's my personal thoughts a lot these days. The opposite. And not to come to America to fix it or to change it and to make it better, but to take advantage of what was already there. And then, yes, of course, make it better in the long run, which I do believe just about every legal immigrant community in this country has done. But not coming here thinking this was something that needed to be fixed. It was a broken country that we were going to come fix as immigrants. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think about that. I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few days because I think even now, leadership, so-called leadership of so many communities gives their own people a death sentence by lying to them. I think Zohar Mamdani did that today, too. I'm Jake Novak. It was an honor to fill in for Rita Cosby. Happy birthday, America.
The Rita Cosby Show
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.